Facebook has the power with the data. And while we're going to talk about who has access to the data and what APIs can access it and where it's stored and blah, 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 the power sits with Facebook. They have the data. Mark Zuckerberg just said they have the data. They use that data to run their business. They use that data essentially to be the most powerful advertising platform in the world. And let's just never forget that, and never forget that there's never been a comment from a senator, from someone in the House, from anyone in the media that says Facebook should stop collecting data. They're just saying Facebook should be careful who they're sharing it with.
And that's point one on this note that you put out today that I think should be well read. It's on Twitter now, and we've shared it as well. Your point is that data access and data collection are two very different things, and that we're not talking about data collection. We seem to be focused on the data access, and that misses the bigger picture here. What is that, and why is this? Why are we so confounded by that?
Well, I'm confounded by it because it's the entire story. So we talk about, let's say there's this center of this universe, it's this data that Facebook has, and we're all talking about who has access to this center of the universe, and they're going to start blocking access to it. Yeah, but this is still here. The center of the universe is the data, and at no point are we talking about what Facebook can and can't do with the data internally, how much it can store. And if you saw what Facebook had about you, and if you saw even the things, there's some online tools which show you what Facebook has about you. It won't show you everything. There are things that Facebook collects about you, it estimates about you, that are even salacious, that you can't even say on television, that would just shock you. And there's never been any discussion about whether or not Facebook should collect less data about you. And the truth of the matter is they've gotten to the point, and maybe they've hoodwinked me. I keep saying it's incidental. I just don't think at this point the United States can stop Facebook from collecting it. Facebook has become too powerful for the United States to deal with it. And so we just don't talk about it. We talk about third-party apps, which is just not the story.
Well, and I mean, this show, we've been focused on and watching Facebook's share price. You, again, look at it from a slightly different perspective. Facebook's impact on U.S. GDP is entirely, at this point, kind of outsized, isn't it?
It is. So what has happened, and I don't think they did it on purpose. I think it's incidental, but it doesn't matter. It is here. The United States can't block Facebook from having all this content because there are 70 million SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, which rely on Facebook and basically wouldn't exist without it. And it's not because they're bad companies. It's just that digital marketing that's really targeted can help create a business. It's a good business. It's good advertising. There's nothing nefarious about it. But at this point, the United States' might has always come from its GDP, which of course, incidentally, supports the largest military in the world. We can't just cut our economy off at the knees by cutting Facebook off at the knees. And I don't think anyone wanted it to come to this point, but it has come to this point. Facebook now essentially holds all the cards, and that's why no one in the Senate hearing is at all talking about data that Facebook has and how they control it, other than this one small window of the 13 to 17-year-olds, this Facebook Kids thing.
Right, but and you also talk about in this note that Facebook has the capacity to control this at a much higher level than it's doing. And we spend so much time on the semantics of, is Facebook a distribution company? Is it a publication? Is it a media company? You say, and was it Mike Isaac from the New York Times that broke the story, that they already have the capacity in place to enormously limit who gets access to what, how that information is passed along. They're just not using it.
Yeah, it's this wonderful narrative Mark Zuckerberg has created, or if we don't make it personal, let's say Facebook has created, that, gosh, it's so much data, it's so hard to govern. I mean, yes, that's true, but it's not like this is a new idea. Facebook's been trying to get into China since forever. Mark Zuckerberg learned Mandarin. He visited China. But by the way, on the technology side, they created an entire system to govern the data, to block viral content that the Chinese government might not like. They built it so that they could work in China. And even if it hasn't been fully developed, which they've kind of said off the record, you know, gosh, it's not fully developed, they've at the very least thought about it in a very serious way. That means they have the technology, they've thought about it, and it's at the scale of China, which means it's at the scale of Facebook, and they just don't use it, and they don't want to use it. And the truth of the matter is, I'm not sure anybody other than the users wants them to use it. But the idea that they don't have the capacity is a total and utter falsehood.
Ophir, you were on this show, I think it was in November. Back when we were talking about Facebook, we just found out that it had the ability to target specific, I think it was hate groups, in fact. And there was talk then about congressional hearings. And you said, and a lot of people on Twitter scoffed at you, you said the value of the company could be cut in half if it had to reduce the amount of that granular level of data that it uses, that it passes along and that it trades on. We've now seen the share price collapse. I mean, sure, it's had its best day since 2016. But let's face it, Facebook stock has taken a beating. Where do you stand on that call now? And how much of that is coming to fruition? How has that view of where the value of this company might lie changed as you watch all of this unfold?
So I believe that if Facebook has to give up the granular data, which would be a near impossibility now, but if they had to, they're worth half as much. They might be worth less than half as much. Having said that, as I'm watching this hearing in the Senate, I see the pre-made remarks, I'm starting to believe that Facebook is now more powerful than it ever has been. And there's just no chance they're going to be forced to give up the data, that they've somehow inserted themselves into the United States GDP, and Congress just can't do anything about it anymore. So yes, if they have to give up the granular data, they're going to get crushed. But so will the U.S. economy, and I just don't see that happening.
When you set up this whole debate, the way that you just have, with point by point about the impact this might have on GDP, about what the real issue is, and then you watch a hearing like that, are the politicians asking the right questions?
Oh, they're doing a beautiful job. They're making it so that Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have to do anything. They're turning it political so they can keep their votes, and nothing will change at all at Facebook. I mean, Senator Cruz seems like a buffoon for those questions, but he's not. He's the genius in the room. Make it political, make it right versus left. Mark Zuckerberg can start talking about how Silicon Valley is left-leaning, but they're trying not to be. And everybody forgets the central issue, which is that Facebook has data on us, and they extrapolate that data in salacious ways that you simply would not believe, and now nobody has to talk about it because the right's going to believe this and the left's going to believe this. What a brilliant, brilliant approach by that senator to totally dismantle these hearings into nothingness.
Okay, so how do we get them back on track? Where does this conversation need to start and finish, and how do we get Facebook answering the right questions? If it's not about data access and it's more about data gathering, let's have that conversation, but how do we even get there, Ophir?
I actually think it starts with a bit of a scare. Mark Zuckerberg has admitted Facebook did wrong. He's admitted that it was his responsibility and he failed. We know in the United States that you can bring criminal charges even if someone did something by accident. For example, if you run a stop sign and didn't see it, you can tell the police officer that, but they're still going to give you a ticket and say, sorry about that. Mark Zuckerberg, we need to get a grand jury to see what Mark Zuckerberg knew and didn't know, and if he was essentially, let's say, okay with potentially treasonous behavior happening on Facebook. And even if a grand jury doesn't indict, it's going to wake Silicon Valley up and remind them that they can't just live as billionaires, they can go to prison. And if we start there and we start with the fear, then the way they use the data and the way they allow access to the data and what they extrapolate from the data will start to matter. Until then, nobody cares, they're all billionaires and they're all getting bigger.